Hello and welcome. I'm Alex Proimos, Head of Institutional Content and Investment Magazine, and this is Market Narratives. This show is a series of unorthodox conversations with thought leaders influencing the world of fiduciary investors. For more related insights and analysis, please remember to check out our website, investmentmagazine.com.au, and subscribe for a free email. And with that, please enjoy this week's episode. My guest today is Vanessa Pigrum, who's the CEO of Cranlana, the Centre for Ethical Leadership, which is a partnership with Monash University. Welcome today, Vanessa.
Thank you, Alex.
So I thought today we would sort of maybe kick off in terms of what Cranlana is, to give the listeners a bit of a context, given that we're going to go into a real deep dive in terms of decision-making in a crisis environment being coronavirus. But maybe if you could sort of give us a kickstart in terms of what Cranlana stands for.
Yeah, sure. So the Cranlana Centre for Ethical Leadership has been around since 1993. And we offer, I guess one of the things that we say is that we don't teach leadership skills to senior executives, but we help those senior executives use their existing leadership skills to better purpose. And our whole purpose is about helping you make more ethical decisions, to make wise and courageous decisions, and to really think about the impact of your influence through your professional life and how you want to make change in an ethical way. So we run programs that are very experiential, lots of discussion-based. Group discussions, lots of challenges about how we really think about the current situations that we're in, and people are often quite transformed by that experience.
Look, I think in terms of transformation, we've seen a huge transformation, which is the coronavirus, and how it's changed the way we live, how we work, how we even go to and from work, and most of the people are still working from home. But I wanted to sort of, touch on some of the issues that you mentioned in terms of people being courageous in decision making. Let's maybe kick off from there in terms of, how do you go about trying to build people's thinking about making decisions, being courageous in a time of, sometimes quite significant adversity?
Yeah, the thing they say around, and I have no idea who the quote's from, but, a crisis doesn't develop your character so much as reveal your character. So, within a crisis, within a sort of time compressed period of adversity, you can't suddenly develop a set of ethical values that you didn't already have. There's, that it's almost like building your ethical foundations is a preventative medicine. You need to be developing them and strengthening them in your daily life before a crisis hits you. And then that's when they really come to the fore. So, having said that, often within a crisis, it might also be that the crisis and the emergency nature of it and the speed with which you have to make decisions might actually make you stop and remember what your deep-seated values actually are. Because we do, over the years, often become foggy or less defined about what our true values are, because we become very pragmatic and practical and operational in our focus. So a crisis really sharpens your thinking and can either make you connect to your good, strong, deep-seated values, or you can feel quite lost and at sea.
It's interesting you talk about sort of people being very pragmatic, and I guess one of the challenges, particularly in the Australian economy, is that we haven't had recession now for 30 years. Looks like we're now tipping into a potential recession. So a lot of people build their character and their values through adversity. And, one of the situations where, in an environment, particularly the Australian environment, where you haven't had so much adversity, do people then have to rely on their adversity maybe as a child? Is that where this initial framework builds up? How do you sort of try to pull people to understand what courage looks like, what a framework of acting in these times of adversity, where does that come from?
It's a really excellent and quite difficult question, Alex. I mean, where does it come from? Where does your resilience come from? Of course, some of it comes from your formative years and what you hold as really strong, true, central, anchoring values that are going to see you through tough decisions. And as an adult, as a professional adult in any sector, you are constantly balancing what your personal values are with what the organisational values are and what the organisational needs are at that time, particularly in a crisis. So this is where the ethical tensions and challenges will flare up. Is what is being asked of me as a professional in line with what I believe or hold to be true personally? And if you're really lucky and you've chosen well, you're in a place where those two things are quite aligned. But a lot of us, are, especially in a time of crisis, will be asked or expected to do things that really go against the grain. I mean, the challenge of deciding if you need to make people redundant, if you need to cut costs drastically in a very short amount of time. How do you do that fairly, equitably, with a long-term vision, not just a short-term quick fix? All of these are real decisions that people have had to make in the last couple of months. Your foundational values and your sense of what is ethical and fair need to be in the mix, not just how do I balance the numbers at the bottom of the balance sheet.
It's an interesting piece there because you talk about fairness and ethical at the same time, and in this particular environment, we're also running up against the need for expediency. And the need to sort of almost suspend the usual practices, particularly as we look to make people redundant or cut costs. How do you balance the fairness aspect with the need to be courageous and also expedient in how we make our decisions?
Well, one thing is that you rely on others as well. I mean, some decisions are made in a solitary way, but these larger decisions should be made with good advice around you. So, you put your thinking to the test. You apply rigor to, the opposing views. You do all of this in a compressed amount of time, of course, but, I would say you don't abandon the good practices that you have in your decision making in a time that's not of crisis. It might just be that the time period is compressed. But, the things that you can do to ensure that you are not doing more damage through your very quick decision-making is to test the decision with other trusted others who might give you an opposing view, who might say to you, yes, that's all very well to do that particular action. It'll help us in the next month, but what does it look like a year down the track? We obviously all have an eye on not just how do we deal with the crisis right now, but how do we ensure that our organisations, our clients, our stakeholders, our employees and peers are in the best possible position for recovery in the months ahead. So it's not easy. It's absolutely not easy, and it's all happening in a very quick amount of time. But there are key techniques that you can use, one of which is to have trusted others around you who will challenge your thinking in a constructive way.
Can we dig into this trusted others piece? Because, when you sit in an organisation sometimes, there feels to be this dichotomy between, the A team and the B team. And that's a very, very simple way of looking at it. But it feels like there's this executive group that just doesn't understand the people on the floor. And so how do you sort of have trusted others so that it actually is to the betterment of the whole organisation, and the whole organisation can sort of understand these values and sort of be on board and sort of realise that when there are some sort of fast decisions that are made, that they're made in the best interest of the whole organisation and not sort of seen as a way to cut certain people, and it's not a personal attack or anything like that, and that there is a sense of value across the whole group. There's not that one particular part is seen as dispensable.
Yeah. Well, the building of trust is difficult to do from scratch within a crisis. So this is where the investment of time and effort in building trust and transparency across your organisation is something that should be happening all the time, because it serves you very well in these times of crisis. Mm-hmm. So, depending on the size of your organisation, there are things that I would recommend in terms of the executive group always having outlets or mechanisms by which other parts of the organisation can feed up constructive criticism, feedback, questions, that there's a culture of being able to question and challenge in a way that's for the good of the organisation long term. So, and as an executive, if you are only talking to other executives, then you're probably doing yourself a disservice as well. If you don't understand or have some connection to what are the impacts of the decisions that you're making at executive level, what are the real life impacts of those decisions on the rest of the organisation, right down to the most junior member of your team, you are setting up a disconnect that is not healthy and is not going to serve you during these compressed times. So there's the building of trust that's really important and long term, and a bit like just general health approach to health of the organisation. And then during the crisis or a crisis itself, the communication and the style of communication of tough decisions is a really key element to build a sense of fairness. It might be tough fairness, but if you communicate the tough decisions in a way that has as much transparency as possible, that explains the reasons why tough decisions are being made, that indicates that the executive team are taking a hit as much as other parts of the organisation, leading by example, that requires a very open and honest and almost vulnerable style of communication with your organisation. I think people pick up pretty quickly if they think information's being hidden from them. And that certainly doesn't help during a crisis.
I totally agree. I think the need for information, or at least the information that's democratized so that everyone is part of decisions and sort of hearing about it. Maybe they don't have the same vote in terms of decision making, but at least that they're sort of not hearing things through the water cooler or other sort of channels via text message or Slack or something else, because that always sort of starts some real issues within an organization. To keeping people all on the same page is critical. Particularly in a crisis, is there a particular approach with the way communication should be done? Is this through like town hall meetings? Is this through an update each week at a particular time? How important is that in terms of this regularity in communications versus sometimes in a crisis is really haphazard sort of emails at all times of the day or night to update their staff?
Yeah, you don't want to be adding to that sense of chaos. I think that the sense of and really just speaking from my personal experience in the first 2 or 3 weeks of the sort of shutdown and everyone moving to work from home, there was an accelerated sense of chaos and quick decisions and information going everywhere, and it's not helpful, I think, to allay people's sense of anxiety or uncertainty about what lies ahead. So again, it depends on your team and your organisation and how you normally communicate, how big the team is. But I think it's really important to have certain times, whether it's once a week or once a fortnight, which is more of a town hall type meeting, so that everyone has the opportunity whether it's 80 or 100 people at a time, to hear the same information at the same time and have a chance to ask questions, or at least just listen to the questions that other people have. At the same time, then within your own team, you can't just rely on those fortnightly or weekly meetings. I've noticed an increase in the amount of communication in our team on a daily level, because you can't rely on the incidental, bumping into someone in the kitchen or in the corridor or overhearing a conversation that's happening and then joining in. You have to be much more overt about, and I sort of track how often am I communicating with each of my team members to make sure that they're getting the individual attention as well as the team meetings, which give a sense of group cohesion.
Is that one of the benefits you would say maybe have come from this environment in terms of now leaders having to really make a much greater attention towards fair distribution of information?
I think so. I mean, as a CEO, I have to admit it's exhausting. It's there is actually research on the neurological impact of Zoom meetings or video conferencing, and how the extra tiredness that comes in from speaking through the screen all the time. But it's absolutely necessary. And I guess from personal experience, what I'm finding is that I've noticed myself being much more revealing of the thoughts that are going into the decisions, because you are missing out on the incidental conversations with your team. So therefore, I tend to explain a lot more about what has led up to a particular decision, or I'm revealing more to my team about the financial impact of the crisis on us and what that's going to mean for budgets in the future, etc. Whereas I might not have done that so often in a face-to-face situation.
It's interesting that point. I know in the investment space, some of the commentary that I've heard is that that there seems to be some more upfront conversations as people are working from home and being part of a Zoom call. So there's another interesting piece where you might see some more transparency from some employees who feel more comfortable to talk because they're sitting at home and much more open to adding into the mix.
Yeah, I agree. It's it's not one size fits all though, and I think sometimes you can miss the signals from, say, the quieter members of your team on a video conference meeting. So I'd say it comes and goes, and you still need to be quite attentive to who's not speaking up, and perhaps they don't want to speak up in a group situation. It's a curious thing, isn't it? Just staring at a gallery view of faces, everyone just staring at you and trying to read the signals as they come across.
It is very strange, and I know for some people that are traditionally introverts, it doesn't really help even though they can still speak. It still doesn't provide that same sort of help that they need. I think one of the questions I wanted to sort of get to, and we talk about sort of leadership as well, is that, not everyone is built for these sort of situations. And, in this sort of crisis environment, the need to be agile becomes so critical. And, for leaders, they have to bring everyone along on the journey. And some people just aren't able to sort of work in the same way as others in these sort of crisis times. So how do you sort of prepare your team and almost, can understand the fear and anxiety that some people have when you're going through such change?
It's monitoring everyone's responses to speed and change and uncertainty is a core part of the leader's role, particularly now. And one of the things that would help is that there's a lot being asked of leaders at the moment to be simultaneously looking at the long-term future of their organisations, managing a crisis in the moment, in the very present moment, making very pragmatic decisions, whilst also trying to think about recovery and plan for recovery, and at this, reporting to boards who now are wanting more information, probably more operational information than they have in the past, because they all need to understand and support the CEO in this time. And at the same time, the CEO or team leader or senior executive is also expected to have a heightened sense of the health and well-being of their team as everyone goes through a very anxiety-invoking time. So there's an awful lot being asked of people in leadership roles right now. And it would be a very special person who can do all of those things equally. So one of the things that springs to mind is to empower, embolden your trusted members of your team to look after each other, and so that it's not all just being channeled through one point of view from the CEO. That there are multiple conversations going on from peer to peer on a support level that feeds up to the CEO, so they're aware of the issues, but not necessarily feeling that they're the only ones responsible for looking after the team health. So I think it's about really understanding the resources at your fingertips, the human resources, the particular strengths of your team and how they can look after each other. And you're absolutely right, Alex, that some people really freeze during a time of uncertainty, and it triggers all sorts of other fears, and particularly if job security is a very real issue. We're not through this crisis yet. So all you can really do is be as upfront with your team as possible, I think, about the financial situation that the organisation's in, the decisions and the challenges that you as the leader are being faced with, so that it's not a mystery to them, and engender an atmosphere and a culture that we're working through this together.
It's interesting you talk about this sort of building the culture. I think one of the benefits for a long time is remuneration and incentive schemes that were sort of designed to build the right sort of culture. There's obviously been some negatives that come with some of these incentive schemes as well, but particularly in a time where there is some financial restraint that needs to be held, some of these incentive schemes now have been on pause. Bonuses and various KPIs sort of seem to fall by the wayside. So do you then face another challenge within these organizations that, how do you keep people engaged, keep people working together towards an end goal when they've been told that remuneration's been cut or incentive schemes have been cut likewise?
Well, this is where the fairness issue comes back into it. If the cuts are across the board, then that becomes more acceptable or more palatable to people. If they feel that only one part of the organisation is being asked to take the pain and that others are being protected from that pain, then that's where further divisions will start to fester. And the thing to keep in mind is that there's an immediate response to dealing with cuts that has to happen. But if your organisation wants to rebuild and wants to keep those people, and you want their loyalty and for them to feel good about working with you and for you in the future, then how you treat them now is absolutely central to your future success.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that we obviously touched on with ethical leadership, is the need for some sort of an ethical DNA. And that's one of the areas that I wanted to sort of get your thoughts on in the terms of, this type of environment, in the time of environment where everyone's looking to grow and build their business, which is now challenged, are we likely to see more of this ethical fade? Where people sort of push ethics alongside, on the side as they try to just survive.
Look, it is a risk. It is a real risk, and ethical fade is a risk. Anyway, I think within a crisis situation, it's probably less about ethical fade and more about ethical drop off, or cutting the cord in a way to say, look, we can't deal with ethics right now. We can't act ethically because we just need to fix this thing, or we need to, lose 100 people, or whatever the quick and drastic decision might need to be. However, I would say that the more enlightened leaders are recognising that now more than ever is when there is not just a role for ethics, but an absolute opportunity for organisations and those who lead them to not just deal with what's necessary in the immediate, but as we look towards rebuilding and recovery, to be using an ethical lens to think about what is the organisation and the nation and the society that we want to rebuild into. And this is where ethics really plays a central role. Do we really just want to make some cuts and then snap back to how we were and not learn from this experience?
Can you give a little bit more context on sort of, if you had to run a series of ethics for an organization? I know that there used to be this analogy that good ethical decision making is anything that you feel comfortable doing that doesn't go on the front page of the daily newspaper, for example. And that was sort of seen as if that's what would be on the daily newspaper, do you feel proud of that, or would it be a disgrace? Is there another sort of framework that you use?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. I mean, there's a spectrum of how people think about ethics, or the term ethics. And down one end is the front page headline, the where we're really looking about, was I illegal activity or fraud or things that don't pass the pub test, as they say. That's not. It might be within the letter of the law, but it's not really acceptable. So you've got down the legality end, and then particularly within the finance sector, there's a heavy reliance on codes and rules, and the sort of compliance end of what you must or must not do within your sector. But that's not enough. That's almost the bare minimum, because then, the further along the line of the spectrum of ethical decision making, you move more into, well, how do we use an ethical framework to engender positive leadership? All these issues we've already touched on about being transparent with your team, building trust and certainty and reliability within your workplace organisation, engendering a culture where people can speak up and question and not feel that if they ask a question they might lose their jobs, which only leads to ethical fading and ethical blind spots. How do you increase productivity and team engagement through having a healthy, ethical workplace? And then further along the spectrum, further away from just the reliance on codes and rules, is the area of ethical leadership, which is really about future vision. And it's thinking about, what is the society? How is my work and my decisions and this organisation, how is this actually helping or hindering the growth of the type of society that I want to live in? And there's a philosopher that we refer to quite often, Kwame Appiah, who wrote an article called "What Will Future Generations Condemn Us For?" And I think this is a very, very useful framework to think of. When we think back on past generations. We look on things like slavery or tobacco advertising, with this kind of horror and a surprise that was ever normal. So if you think about what are we doing now that we think imaginatively, what will our grandchildren say about our daily work practices now? What will they be shocked by? What will they think was an absolutely counterproductive or unfair practice? And that's the big thinking, creative, imaginative leap end of ethics that is far away from just relying on codes and rules.
It's funny when I think about that sort of what can we be condemned for, and there's a lot of things that change, and it can actually raise a lot of question marks in your head about a lot of what we do, right? And sometimes I think there's some real clashes of ideology between sort of how ethics works and some forms of capitalism. And it seems a little bit extreme, but when you start to think about how we charge for service, for advice, obviously the financial services sector has had a lot of trouble with respect to fees for no service and so forth. Finance is an interesting space, particularly when it has to sort of look at what's fair, what's ethical, and those lines are extremely blurred. So how do you? Yeah.
How do you? Sorry, I interrupted you.
How do you try and give yourself a purpose? How do you work out where to sit there? It feels like a difficult fence to ride on.
Well, I didn't want to give you a sort of existential crisis today, Alex, but yes, it is. It is the big questions, and I think finance is a fascinating area. Finance, superannuation, all of these things where, on one level, from purely an outsider's point of view, I'm not from the finance sector. You could think, well, it's all about controlling risk or managing risk. It's about numbers. It's quite clean. But really, the impact that the finance sector has on people's decisions about the emotional and the psychological side of the economy, where is superannuation investing its funds? What are the ethics of investing in fossil fuels during a climate emergency, for example? What are the levers that the finance sector pulls and pushes are enormously powerful, and therefore, more than ever, the sector needs to be thinking about the deeper ethical impact of the decisions that are being made. It's not just about numbers. It affects people's livelihoods, their health, their well-being, family certainty. It impacts on every part of our lives.
So maybe final question, as we think about ethics and leadership in this time of crisis and beyond, right? Let's look beyond this current coronavirus. There will be other financial crises that come out there. What are the sort of tools or techniques or case studies that leaders need to be running through to get themselves into preparation for these sort of things? I know, a crude example is the military runs through all sorts of scenarios and testing. Do enough businesses do that?
I don't think they do. And yet the military is a very good example of the amount of scenario planning they do. And some businesses do it, but it doesn't seem to be common practice. It does, because it takes time and it requires a large leap of creative thinking as well to imagine alternative futures. One key technique might be, the pre-mortem, post-mortem sort of approach to looking back. Imagining that a decision you've made has gone terribly wrong, and we're now a year down the track, and we're looking back on why it went wrong, and to sort of reverse engineer the decision you're about to make. There's no one quick fix. That's the thing. Developing your ethical muscle and a sense of some rigor around your critical thinking is a discipline, and it requires constant practice. And it helps if you've got other people around you who you can test those ideas with, that you're not a lone voice in your organisation, raising your hand and saying, I think we should pause for a moment and just think about the impact of this decision. So I'm afraid I don't have a quick fix for you, or one case study to solve all the problems here. It is about turning your mind to a longer term view of imagining the impact of your decision right now, not just on you or your team or your organisation, but on the people who are not as visible to you. Who is just outside your line of sight that your decision has an impact on? And are you making the best, most ethical, most sound decision that will not create more unfairness or injustice for others?
It's a fascinating place to end. It almost represents the pub test again, where someone totally outside your network, hears something and looks at it and says, that doesn't seem right, or, it's that person outside your periphery that views your decision making. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I would recommend that you have people in your group of trusted advisors and peers who are outside your industry, who you are happy to listen to, who you are willing to listen to, and to get an external view. You may still go ahead with that same action, but if it does nothing else than give you a moment to pause and reflect and consider the fuller 360-degree view of what you're about to do, that's the best chance you have of being able to live with that decision in the future.
Mm-hmm. All right, Vanessa, that's a very great place to leave it. Thank you very much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. All views expressed on this podcast are subject to change and do not necessarily reflect the views of Conexus Financial. This podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be relied upon as investment advice.